All right, let's move to second topic, Jeff, on the list. The Wall Street Journal's Lindsay Ellis had an interesting piece headlined, "Elite Colleges Are Back," at the top of the list for company recruiters. Basic argument in the article, if articles are allowed to make an argument, was that large companies with recruiting functions are essentially narrowing right now the number of campuses they're recruiting from as the labor market has tightened again, if you will. And rather than say, go to the HBCU, they're sticking to some set of quote unquote highly selective schools plus a set of regional players. Now, I want to go back to, we had the podcast Adobe a few times ago, and we had Simon Coe on it. And he made an interesting point that a lot of employers were actually already pulling back from going to campuses for recruiting. Here's what he said.
That's kind of left. That's not on the table anymore. And you look at kind of what's happened, especially after COVID, like we've stopped going to campuses, right? We can do everything through Handshake, 1220, RippleMatch. There are actually tools that will match students with our job profile. So why do we even need to go to schools anymore? So the brand of the school, it still matters to many people, but probably not as significant anymore, even majors.
So Jeff, in some ways, maybe this actually isn't all that new, although I think there are some twists here where Lindsay's piece argues in essence that the big brand schools, if you will, they're in the driver's seat. And I wanted to ask you about this because you made the argument in Dream School, a couple things here that I'd love your take on. Number one, you were, I think, making the argument that brands are mattering somewhat less than we think that they do, because companies are recruiting from a wider range of schools than we realize, perhaps, and it's a little less stacked. So I guess this article might refute that. And then, so, do you stand by the current argument? But then here, I think this is in favor of what you've said, is number two, you did make the argument that where you go to school outside of some set of institutions probably will determine the companies or industries where you're going to have job opportunities, and you may well even stay there. You made the point, like, yes, people are going to Southern schools. Hey, think about what that means, because that probably means you're going to get access to more jobs down there, and you might, your best opportunities will be to stay in those regions over time. And in some ways, I actually think this article sort of doubles down on that argument. So one may be refuting, one may be actually doubling down. What's your take?
Well, Michael, I think it's complicated. I'm not trying to avoid the question on refuting
that's okay.
Dream School, because you were not the only one who sent me Lindsay's article, and Lindsay's a great reporter, and I really appreciate she did this piece. A bunch of people sent it to me and said, "Oh, this must really just like kill the argument of chapter 2 of your book, where I say the elites, don't matter." And by the way, I didn't say.
And by the way, that's not
matter,
quite
right?
what you said.
That's not quite what I said, right? I think people are truncating that argument, and the argument was the elites still matter, but so do other schools. And where the elites really matter, as we know, are the big banks, the big tech firms, like the elite jobs at the elite. If you're at the top of the elite institutions, you're going to do really well in the elite job market. You're going to do much better than students at any other institutions. As I made the point in chapter 2, is if you're at the mid or low point at at these elite schools, those students that Al Franken said, just probably went to the hockey game all the time and didn't go to class, right? Somebody has to come in last at Harvard. You might have a little bit more trouble. Harvard's just not going to catapult you to the top of the recruitment pools of these institutions. And that's really the point I was trying to make. I'm not trying to say the elites are terrible, that no one's recruiting there, but that many institutions or many companies and firms are recruiting at a broader range of institutions, especially top students, that they could get into their pools much earlier on, by the way, than the job market. And this is even in the intern market. So I think it's a little bit more nuanced, a little bit more complicated than just to say they're not recruiting at the elites anymore. On the second point, I think the regionality of the job market was really the point of chapter 2 of Dream School. And this is really critical. I was just in Alabama. You had mentioned we were in Boise before, and right before we were in Boise together, I was in Alabama. Said nobody ever has gone from Alabama to Boise except for me, probably. But there I did.
The route you took.
Yes, the route I took, because there's no direct flight between those two cities, by the way. But I was in Birmingham and spent a lot of time with the community members there, as well as with parents and students. And it really is, you really see when you're in the Southeast, just like when you're in the Northeast and the Mid-Atlantic and the Midwest and the West Coast, that except for a number of big companies and firms, and we know this from the Lightcast data that I had in the book, that the job market is a regional game. And except for Vanderbilt, which largely is able to get its graduates outside of the Southeast among, the SEC schools, for example, is what Lightcast studied. You're probably going to work in, Birmingham. You're going to work in Atlanta. You might work in Tallahassee or Orlando or Miami, but you're more likely to be, there's more of a regionality to the game. And I think that's what we're seeing here, largely because companies don't want to spend a lot of money on recruiting. The people who are recruiting for them tend to be alumni of these schools. Also, job expectations or salary expectations more so are more regionally based. So that I don't think has changed in the last couple of years. And that really was the point of chapter 2 of the book as well.
Yeah, look, resonates to me. And I will also say, it seems to me, much of Lindsay's article focused on those large companies that have big recruiting functions, have some predictability of how many people they're going to hire and interns, and there's a whole pipeline. A lot of jobs, as we know, are in the small, medium-sized companies, right? And those are far less predictable. They are definitely regional. And my take is, if they're not showing up on campuses, it's actually a detriment on both sides of the equation. And that I think colleges just need to get much more proactive with connecting them. And final thing, just on regionality, I think it's going to matter more in the years ahead, not less. I think there's a view that, Jay, we showed virtual work works and so forth. Given how everyone's applying to jobs with AI and so forth, I just think the network becomes that much more important. The networks get forged in person largely, and therefore your college and where you went outside of some of these national brands, I think becomes more important, not less.